This is where the luxury car business in India started. And this is how it's going. Welcome to Gone But Not Forgotten, where we're rewinding back 30 years when Mercedes-Benz began their operations in India with the W124 E-Class. Because, as a wise man once said, remember the past, live in the present, and write the future. What you were doing 30 years ago? I had turned 17, just gotten into junior college. Warriors in Pune, a marked step up from the boys' school that I just graduated from, living my best life. I had yet to get my driving license. I had just started dating the girl who I'd eventually marry. And 30 years ago, her dad used to run the best garage in Pune, the place where the first Mercedes-Benzes to be made in India, the W124 E-Class, had the PDI inspection done. The cars in these pictures were the first two E-Classes to be delivered in Pune. The silver one, now that's Rahul Bajaj's, and the blue one, that's politician Patangrao Kadam's. And the backside, the guy who's working on the car, that's my future brother-in-law. It was at this garage that I got my first taste of Mercedes-Benz. Of course, I didn't drive it. These cars were going to be delivered to big shot industrialists and politicians, and the baby-faced boyfriend of the daughter was not going to be let out in it. But I sat behind the steering wheel and I dreamed. I looked at the three-pointed star and I dreamed even harder. I saw power windows for the first time in my life, but I dare not play with it. I saw real wood on a car, and this was not some pseudo fake plasto wood. This was real wood, but it was laminated many times over so that in a crash, this would not splinter. The door shut. Solid door shut. This was the safest car in the country. This was the fastest car in the country. This was also the most expensive car in the country, with options that cost around 22 lakh rupees. And just to give you a frame of reference back then, the best-selling car in the country, the people's car, the 800 with AC, cost 2.6 lakh rupees. It gave birth to a whole new segment, and this was so far out of the realm of possibility that road test of the time, Auto India magazine, June 1995, Hormuz Sorabji writes, Nostradamus himself could not have predicted that Mercedes-Benz would set up shop in India. And for added measure, he put in a country not exactly known for its car-making prowess. And car making is exactly what Mercedes-Benz did in India. Pressed steel panels of the 124 were sent down from Germany. They were mounted on jigs, welded to create the monocoque. Back then, the strongest and safest monocoque ever to be made in India. Then the entire shell went into the paint shop for painting, and for the Mercedes levels of paint finish, they upgraded the paint shop to the best quality paint shop seen in India. After the paint, the electricals, the fuel line, the interior, even the seats, these weren't fully built seats that came from Germany. The seats were actually put together here in India. All of that is documented in Car and Bike International in Adil Jal Darukanawala's road test. In fact, 2 years later, Mercedes started to assemble the rear axle, engine and gearbox in India, a commitment to make in India even before the term was coined. 2 years later came the twin-eyed W210 in September of 1997. A year later, work commenced on a new plant in Chikli on the outskirts of Pune, and on the 1st of Jan 1999, it was up and running. In December of 2000, the W220 S-Class rolled out, an absolutely momentous occasion for the Indian luxury car business. Remember, the E-Class cost between 27 to 29 lakh rupees. The S-Class went up to 72 lakh rupees, and yet the first batch of 84 S-Classes soon found buyers. A few months later, May 2001, came the W203 C-Class. In Feb of 2003, after 9 years, the 10,000 cars milestone was hit. In 2007, ground broke on a brand new facility in Chakan outside Pune and operations commenced on Feb 24th, 2009. That's where we are. Behind me is the administrative building. Behind that is the manufacturing line, the most advanced CKD operations for Mercedes-Benz anywhere in the world. Here's where the next milestones arrived. W116 ML class, forerunner to the GLE and the first luxury SUV in India, came in September of 2010. 2 years later, local assembly began, followed by the GL class. In 2010, the 30,000 cars milestone was hit. In 2014, the 50,000 car milestone was hit. In 2015, I picked up the GLA from this very factory, shipped it to Stuttgart and drove it from there back to Pune on the first GLA adventure. That very year, local production of Maybach began, followed a year later by the GLC. Another year later, 2018, the long wheelbase E-Class arrived, and a year after that, the first BS6 car in India, which was also the 100,000th Mercedes rolled out of the Chakan line. I remember coming here in 2020 after the first COVID wave started to wane to drive the first luxury electric car in the country, the EQC. 2 years after that came the EQS, India becoming only the second place in the world after Germany to assemble this luxury electric car and setting the template for CKD operations to follow in Malaysia as well as Thailand. To my right is the newly revamped Center of Excellence, where most recently the EQE electric SUV was launched. They've got catering by the Ritz-Carlton, so it's now time for a coffee and a nice book. Adil, in his excellent book on Mercedes-Benz winning, says that the Mercedes-Benz India story actually began in the 60s when an entire squadron of 180s was sent to India and the keys to at least a dozen cars were handed over to KB Lal, Krishna Menon and other union ministers for use in the course of their official duties for a year. The idea was that once they found them suitable, then possible talks could begin for phased licensing in the same manner as Mercedes-Benz trucks that were already being made in India. But a year later, when the cars were asked about, the keys were symbolically handed back and no word was forthcoming from the powers that be. That was the socialist mindset, and it only crumbled in the 90s when India had to mortgage her gold reserves to the World Bank. That's when economic liberalization kicked in. And on April 22nd, 1994, in Stuttgart, the agreement was signed and Mercedes-Benz India came to be. Like I said, I was only 17. I had to wait another year until I got my driving license and another 3 years until I got to drive my very first Mercedes-Benz, which also happened to be an E-Class, the four-eyed E-Class. This was the first V6 Mercedes. I think it was also the first V6 ever to be sold in India because we made a really huge deal about it. Splashed it front and center on the cover. Not very nicely, I have to admit, on hindsight, but it was here on the cover. And this, incidentally, was the first automatic car that I ever drove. Adil, he let me drive it for all of 500 meters and I loved it. I thought it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'll share a secret here. I was only planning to do a year at Overdrive and then head off to the States, do my masters. I already got my admissions, scholarships, all that sorted out. But automotive journalism was letting me drive Mercs, and which 21-year-old guy was going to quit this to go back to studying? I actually drove the 124 for the first time very recently when we started the Gone But Not Forgotten page in Evo India magazine. This is that very same car. This car is owned by our technical editor's uncle, and being Parsi owned, it's in almost the same condition as when it rolled out of the factory gates. But W124s, actually most of them are in such spick and span condition because these cars were engineered to last, to really, really last. And it had details that enthusiasts in the day really tripped over. Like this single wiper blade, which actually jumps on a cam at the center of its stroke to cover some 95% of the entire windscreen. The wing mirrors, The left side mirror is actually smaller than the right side, and the reason that was done was because Mercedes-Benz in their research saw that drivers tended to knock the wing mirror on the passenger side. So that's why it was made a little smaller, and that also aided aero, which we'll talk about in a bit. And these vents over here, this was the only visual differentiator between the petrol and the diesel E-classes, and of course the badging on the boot. The laws of the time mandated that minimum 15% indigenous content had to be there, and that's why certain things like the batteries, the bulbs, fasteners and the tires were Indian. I remember back then there was a lot of hoo-ha about the JK tires that the E-Class came with. But Adil, in his road test, he clarified that the tires were adequate to the task at hand. But in the same breath, he also said that if buyers of the E-Class upgraded their rubber to European spec, then Mercedes-Benz would actually unlock the engine to the full Euro spec in terms of power and torque. Safety was something that Mercedes never compromised on. In his road test, Adil even said, there is a saying that if at all you have to meet with an accident, make sure you are in a Mercedes-Benz. The W124 was a safety pioneer. This was the first car in India with airbags as standard fitment. 2 airbags, driver airbag and passenger airbag. This was the first car with ABS as standard. The first car in India with disc brakes on all 4 wheels. The first with side impact beams in addition to the front crumple zones. It had seat belts for all the occupants, and the seat belts also adjusted for height, and it also had belt tensioners. This wasn't very common, prompting one of the road tests to actually say, the seat belts come with belt tensioners. That means you can wear the seat belt at all times since they sit snugly on your body without restricting you. This was Indian Auto in May of 1997. This was the road test of the automatic E220. The petrol got an automatic gearbox, and that came, I think, 6 months after the manual gearbox. And of course, because you had the airbag out here, you didn't get a glove box, and that's why you had to use the door pockets. Cup holders, no cup holders. You had this sliding tray over here, which was lockable. But on the safety aspect, it was actually very difficult to crash a W124 because it had a then revolutionary rear suspension design. The rear suspension, it was referenced as near legendary. The W124 had a then innovative 5-link rear suspension, which actually set the template for all other premium cars to follow. With the 124, you didn't have to worry about on bends, the rear losing composure or going sideways. The W124 was neutral, it was predictable, and to quote, it had outstanding stability on bends. Of course, by the standards of today, the suspension feels way too soft. There is a lot of body roll. The recirculating ball steering feels way too slow. In fact, the steering wheel itself feels way too big. But it has that most Mercedes of all Mercedes qualities, and that is comfort. This is so comfortable. Even by the standards of today, this ride comfort is something else. The seats are wide and they're comfortable. In fact, this road, we used to do a lot of shoots here 10 years ago when we started Evo. Now we don't come here at all because the roads are in really poor condition. But the 124, it soaks it all in. You don't feel it, you don't hear it. This is just lovely, so lovely. The joys of driving an old car at a leisurely pace, using the manual gearbox, heel and toe. It takes you back to a simpler time. But a time when with cars like these, safety wasn't compromised, quality wasn't compromised, engineering was over and above all other considerations. Power? The E220 got India's first 4-valve dual overhead cam engine. It made 140 bhp and 200 Newton meters of torque. Again, the highest power and torque outputs we had seen in a passenger car in the country. Car and Bike International magazine, they tested it 0 to 100 in 9.8 seconds, which was the fastest car they had tested in the country. Even today, 30 years later, 0 to 100 in under 10 seconds is a benchmark for a fast car. And the 124, it did it all those years ago. The one that we're driving right now is the E250 diesel. This came around 6 months after the petrol. And again, this had a number of firsts. This was the first passenger car with more than 4 cylinders. This was a 5-cylinder engine. It displays 2.5 liters. And Auto India, in their April 1996 road test, said that this was a high-tech, high-revving diesel engine, the likes of which we had never seen before. This put out 113 bhp, 170 Newton meters of torque. Auto India, they tested this car 0 to 100 in 16.5 seconds, which was quick for its time. For reference, they said that this was quicker than a Zen, and the Zen was a reference point of the time, a reference point for a fast car. In fact, Auto India went on to add that above 120 kmph, the E250, it left all other cars in India for dead. This they tested to 170 kmph top speed, but they said that it could go up to 190 kilometers per hour if they had appropriate roads. Those days, we didn't have roads for fast cars. The E220, they tested to 180 or so kilometers per hour, and Mercedes claimed that it could do 210 kilometers per hour. Again, another first. The first passenger car in the country, the first anything in the country that could do over 200 kilometers an hour. And did I mention that the W124 was over-engineered? Mercedes engineered this car like no other car in the world, with zero cost-cutting. This was the best proportioned, best engineered, longest lasting car of all time. So much so that the very first E220 to be tested in India in that Auto India test is still alive and kicking.
Yeah, hi, I'm PD Singh. I'm the owner of the very first W124 E220 that was registered by Mercedes. I'm the lucky owner of this car and I've had it for the last few years. So when I saw this car with Mr. Ravikant, and for a number of years, I was trying to convince him, ultimately got it a few years ago and have had the pleasure of owning it and riding in it. What I really like about this car is the fact that while it is 30 years old, it has a classic contemporary design, a timeless design. For those times, it had a remote control opening and in fact, a color-coded opening and closing that you could use so effectively. The whole love affair began when I bought my first 124, and that's the time I realized what an iconic vehicle it was. The reason why it's an easy car to maintain is probably because there are a number of them still in service and on the road. I believe there are about more than 1,700 such cars on the road in India today, and spare parts, etc. is not really much of a problem.
So I had it for almost about 18 years. So I had it with me in Tata Motors, and then when I stepped down, I used it for another 4 or 5 years. And then PT had his eye on this car for a long time, and therefore I said he's perhaps the most deserving to own this car, and that's how he has the car now. I think the whole look of the car is very classy. It's one of those new jazzy kind of things. It is understated kind of luxury, and sitting inside it, I think it reflects that. You feel that understated luxury. And back to you, Sirish, for carrying on this story.
The W124 was the quintessential German engineered car, quintessential German styling of the 80s. This was form following function. It had square proportions, but it was built with a sense of solidity. Opulence was intentionally toned down compared to the predecessing W123. It had chrome on the nose, but that was it. In fact, a lot of places, it swapped chrome for anodized aluminum. Superior quality of materials leading to superior quality. And even though it doesn't look it, this was honed in the wind tunnel. The rear, wedge-shaped, but it had a tapering rear, sort of like a teardrop, and that gave it a coefficient of drag of 0.26, making it one of the most aerodynamically efficient cars of that era. And the same philosophy continues to this day. The EQS is the most aerodynamically efficient luxury car in the world with a CD of 0.20. And like the W124 was the first luxury car to be assembled in India, so too the EQS is the first luxury EV to be assembled in India. And that also happens to be the boss's own car. Santosh, thank you for being with us. Santosh Iyer is the MD and CEO of Mercedes-Benz India. Santosh, what does the 124 mean to you?
Well, it's iconic for us. We are celebrating 30 years in India, and when I joined this company, it was right there in the new plant. A lot of pride among people who have built this car, and also for me, because I tested an E-Class before I joined this company. I was in Chennai. I went to a local Mercedes-Benz dealership before I joined here just to check, and they had an E-Class 211, if I'm not wrong, with the round headlights, and that's where I experienced my first Mercedes-Benz.
You've driven the 124. What comes to mind? What was your experience like?
You know, it was quite recent. When I drove this car, there was a classic car rally in Bombay, and I had a privilege to be driven and also driving this car. The first thing was the tank-like feeling, once you get in the gear knobs, the entire steering wheel as such. But what caught my attention is also the single wiper actually on the car. That's again quite unique by itself. And also the attention to detail on a lot of different areas. Of course, when you drove, it was as immaculate, as good, and you felt a bit of safe while driving this car.
Yeah, this was the safest car when it came to India, the fastest car, the most expensive car. There were a lot of firsts with the 124. These were all brand values that were established back in the 90s, 30 years ago. What strengths, what brand values continue to this day with Mercedes in India?
See, we are the most desirable brand in India, and the reason for me is, of course, the love from the customers, but also the trust that we have built over a period of time, the reliability of these machines, as I said, referred as a tank because of the reliability that goes within these cars. So it's a very tough challenge for me and my team to really live up to those expectations and actually go beyond it if possible. That's what the brand wants us to do. We keep saying we invented the car and we continue to invent it again, and we will reinvent it for the future. So, but I think these are the values which really keeps us pushing us forward to ensure the three-pointed star is shining always.
And what does Mercedes finally mean to you personally?
Well, I've completed 15 years now. In April, I'll be completing this 15 years with the brand. A lot of nostalgia, a lot of feelings. The brand has given a lot to me, but it's beyond organization. It is a lot of emotions with this, a lot of love for the brand for sure. But for me, it has redefined the way I looked at my professional life, and also I learned a lot. The brand has been kind enough to send me abroad for many trainings, many programs on different aspects, intercultural programs. And I think in that sense, it's beyond car. It's an emotion and very hard to express.
Thank you, Santosh. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching this special episode of Gone But Not Forgotten. How it started, how it's going. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comments. Also, let us know what cars do you want us to feature next in our Gone But Not Forgotten series. Thank you for watching.
I'm nice. You ain't gotta tell me twice. I already pulled my stripes, and I don't need your advice. They gon' have to step right back, and they gon' say, dang, he right. But you ain't gotta tell me twice. You ain't gotta tell me twice. Look, okay, young boy got him on stress. They feel Spain without S, but I'ma throw it up like bench press. They can't step how I step, and that's why they mad. I got them all pressed. They say you just a youngin', you came in no hits. Coach had the stats. Man, she talking like Mikey, won't you date me?